To Jesus for the cleansing power. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed?
What a pleasure it is to be here with you today. I appreciate this opportunity. What a great way to start off this week worshiping with my friends at the Eastwood Street Church of Christ. I appreciate the opportunity. It's good to see you, and I look forward to being able to visit with you after the services. I'm reminded of a story that former President Bush, the 41st president, told, and he had heard about an elderly man who had been arrested for shoplifting. He'd been in a grocery store and he had stolen something, and so the man was called to the judge, and he stood before the judge, and him and his wife stood before the judge. The judge looked at him and said, "You stole a can of peaches. How many peaches were in that can?" The elderly man looked at the judge, and he said, "There were 6, Your Honor." He says, "I'll give you 6 days in jail for that." Then his wife interrupted and said, "But Judge, he stole a can of peas too." So she wanted to get her point across, and she told the truth. This morning we're going to talk about some things that I think are very important for the church. And it's something that I've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 years for the university, talking about how to keep our young people faithful. Brother DeWeese asked me to talk about on how to raise our children, raising our children right. And we're going to talk about that. I'm not going to give you the lesson that I've been doing for the last 3 years, but I'm going to share some things with you this morning. There are really 2 parts. The first part is dealing with parents, and then the second part deals with the church, because I think that it takes parents and a church to raise young people to be Christian young people. In fact, if you have not read this Gospel Advocate that's on the podium today in front of us here, Dan Jenkins wrote an outstanding article on what can be done to help raise our young people to be faithful Christians, and he talks about several things there that jump out to me. In fact, the last part of the lesson, I'll point out some things that he shared. First of all, let's talk about raising children. You know, it's kind of expensive to raise a child. In fact, the latest statistics from 2014 tells us that the average cost of raising a child born in 2013 to the age of 18 is $304,480. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Brother Charlie, Kayla didn't cost that much. I promise. Right, Kayla? She did. Close. But $304,480. What that breaks down to is $16,915.55 per year, $325.30 per week. And it's no shocker when we see numbers like this that raising a child can put a strain on family finances. And we ask the question, is it worth what it costs to raise a child? And I think we all know that the answer is yes. It's definitely worth the price that it costs to raise a child. One thing I want to point out as we get started this morning is you only get one chance with your children. With everything else, you get 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 chances. But with our children, we have one chance. We have one chance. While they're under our roof, we have one opportunity to raise them right. And I want to encourage you parents to take that opportunity to raise your children right, teach them to love the Lord, and hopefully what we want for them is that they will be faithful. I want to share with you some ideas that I have this morning that can kind of point us in a direction of helping to raise these children the right way. First of all, as parents, I want to tell you to practice what you preach. This generation of young people is a very observant generation. In fact, we know that based on what we see and based on what we hear. In fact, they watch you as parents all the time. They see what's important to you, they know what's important to you, and when you tell them to do something and you don't do it, they're going to point those fingers right back at you and say, well, you don't do it. And this group of young people that we're dealing with today is probably the most observant generation of any that I've witnessed since I've been alive, because they pay attention to everything that we say and that we do. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, Solomon says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. When we look at that first part of that verse, is train up a child in the way he should go. Parents, understand you can't expect other people to train your child. And what this implies is that you know the way to train them. That you understand how you are to live. That you understand what's involved in being a Christian. And that you can train them the right way. A lot of times we want other people to do the training for us. But parents, they won't listen to anybody like they will you. And they don't pay attention to anybody like they do you. When I was working as a youth minister in Coleman, Alabama, there was a children's home there called Child Haven. And a lot of the kids that lived at Child Haven were from homes that were dysfunctional and they had not been taken care of, they'd been neglected or abused, and they lived at Child Haven because of that. But every chance those kids got, what they wanted to do was to go home. Didn't matter how ugly their parents had been to them. Didn't matter how they had been mistreated. Their hope and their desire was to go home. You see, home is where our hearts are. And that's where our children's hearts are. And that's why it's important for us to train them up in the way that they should go. This involves doing the right things yourself, as I said. In an observant generation that we have, we can't expect them to live right if we don't live right. And one of the things that I expect out of my children is that they will be better than me. And it's hard for us to expect them to be better if we don't do the best we can. But we want them to be better than we are. We want them to have more opportunities than we do. And we want to see that they are successful. And we need to train them up in the way they should go. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. That's the goal. That's what we want. We want to see our young people be faithful to God and to put him first in everything they do. But they're not going to do that if you don't put God first. It's so important for us to set the proper example for our children. Ephesians chapter 6 says, bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And we know what's involved there. Love them and teach them to do what is right. I'm reminded of what Brother Dan Winkler told his sons when they were growing up. Every day he'd drop them off at school. He said, be a leader for what's right and not a follower for what's wrong. Every day, Daniel told me that his dad said that to him. And so my kids got to hear the abbreviated Southern version of that, the Alabama version. I put them out, I say, do the right thing. Do the right thing. Every day I tell them to do that. And it's important that they know that they're expected to do the right thing. And we've got to set the proper example at home and at church. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 and 15, we saw what Paul had said that Timothy had learned at home. He had learned from some people that made a great difference in his life. And they set the right kind of example for him. The article by Dan Jenkins in the Gospel Advocate is outstanding. And he says it takes a congregation to raise a child. And we'll look at that in just a few moments. Timothy was influenced by his elders, by his preachers, and by other Christians. And our young people are going to be influenced, hopefully, by the elders, by the preachers, and by other Christians too. And let's work together to influence them. The second thing I want to say this morning is parents, be parents. We've got too many parents who want to be friends instead of parents. In fact, I see a lot of people that I know that are living their life through their children. Instead of letting their children live their life, they're living their lives through them. And they get involved, and they intercede, and they take over things, and they get things to be a mess. But then I see many families that are run by the children. What the children say is what goes. As parents, we've got to make sure that we have a good relationship with their children. But let's remember that as parents, we are the ones that are in charge. We are the ones who make the decisions, and we are the ones who are responsible for what happens. We are the parents, and that involves discipline. The Bible talks about discipline. If you have your Bibles, look at Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. Solomon says, verse 24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Discipline is important when we're talking about our children. It's important that we discipline them. In Proverbs chapter 19, in verse 18, he says there, discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. You see, discipline is an important part of the lives of our children. There are a lot of philosophies and a lot of teachings that come along over the years, and sometimes things say don't discipline your children. But if we don't discipline, what we're doing is we're asking for trouble later on. And we need parents who are willing to be parents. I'm thinking right now of a young lady, she's not young anymore, she's my age, so I don't guess she's young. But she worships with us there at the Henderson Church. And her whole life has revolved around her child. Everything she does revolves around that child. She wants to be her friend. She wants to let her do what she wants to do. And she doesn't care about what's going on. Everything revolves around this child. And I'm going to tell you, they've got a mess. Because the child runs the family. And that's not how it is. The Bible teaches us that as parents, we need to be parents. And we need to be the ones who are in control. If you are a parent, I would encourage you today to monitor what your children view online and on their cell phones. They have a lot of evil available at the touch of their fingers. Through media, through internet, things like that. Pay attention to what they're viewing. Pay attention to what they're looking at and who they're talking to and what they're talking about, because that's important. You are the parent, you be in charge, and you monitor those things. Nobody else is going to. If you don't, it won't be monitored at all. So monitor those things. I came across something that's called Raising a Delinquent Child. 12 ways or rules to raise a delinquent child. This was originally done by Irma Bombeck back in the 70s. Down in Houston, a police department made a pamphlet out of this. And let me share what she said. She said, first of all, give them everything they want. This way they will grow up to believe that the world owes them a living. That makes sense, doesn't it? Second thing, it said laugh when they pick up bad words, because this will make them think that it's cute and they'll continue to do it. Never give any spiritual training. Wait until he's 21 and then let him decide for himself. That's too late. That's too late. Avoid the use of the word no. It may develop a guilt complex. This will condition him later to believe that when he's arrested for stealing a car, that society is against him and is being persecuted. I deal with students that a lot of times have not heard the word no. And what happens when they're not taught no is that it leads to a lot of problems. Fifth thing that she said was pick up everything they leave lying around. And when you do this, he or she will be experienced in throwing all responsibility on others. Doesn't that happen a lot today? Nobody wants to accept responsibility. The sixth thing is let them surf the internet with no restrictions. We know what that leads to. It leads to addictions. That leads to broken families. That leads to relationships that are strained. Make sure you do put those restrictions. 7, quarrel frequently in front of your children. This way they won't be shocked when the home is broken. Their home is broken in later years. Give them all the money that they want. Never let them earn his own. Never make them work for it. Give them everything they want. The 9th thing, satisfy their craving for food, drink, and comfort. See that every sensual desire is gratified. They have everything they want. 10th, take their side against neighbors, teachers, and policemen. Now, teachers can understand that, can't you? Because there's some children that never do anything wrong. And when a parent takes their side against everybody, it leads to a lot of trouble, and it teaches them to think that people are prejudiced against them. The 11th thing, when they get in trouble, apologize for yourself by saying, I never could do anything with him. And then the 12th thing that she said was that you need to prepare for a life of grief, because that's what's going to happen when you follow those rules and those guidelines. We need to make sure that as parents, we are parents. The third thing that I would say this morning is we need to let them deal with the consequences of poor choices. Don't constantly bail them out of difficult situations. A lot of parents want to do everything they can to make trouble go away for their child, their son or their daughter. And what happens is they don't deal with the consequences, and so they think there are no consequences. We need to teach our children to deal with the consequences of the decisions that they make. I'm not saying don't help them, not saying that at all, but they've got to understand that there are consequences with decisions. The prodigal son dealt with the consequences of his decision. Before he went back home, the father didn't go and bail him out. He let him come to his senses, and he let him come back home. Galatians chapter 6 is what you reap, what you sow. And we know that's true, and they need to be able to deal with the consequences. It's not always someone else's fault when trouble comes their way. Sometimes they bring it on themselves, and they need to be able to deal with those consequences. Fourth thing I would say is involve them in God's work. I appreciate so much the fact that the young people are on a campaign this week, and that Adam and Lana and Victor and the group have gone down to Honduras. What a great thing for them to do. When those young people are involved in God's work, research tells us that they will continue to be faithful. We need to attend the services and teach them the importance of following God's will. We need to be there when services meet, and we need to teach them how important it is to follow God's will. We need to teach them to serve others in campaigns and opportunities they have to serve all around. Even in Paris, they can serve others. We need to encourage them to be involved in the youth group. That's an important thing. It's important for them to be involved with other young people who are doing right and help them to be involved. But as a parent, you also can be involved in the Lord's work. You need to be involved yourself and let them see that it's important to you as well. The fifth thing that I would say this morning is that we need to know their friends. This goes without saying. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 says, "Be not deceived, evil companions corrupt good morals." I want to tell you something. If our young people associate with evil people, it's going to rub off on them. Friends determine where they go and how they act many times. You know from your life the impact that your friends have on teenagers. I saw a sign in front of North Jackson Church not long ago, and it said, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." And isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? Our friends determine a lot about our future. So it's important that we know who they're hanging around with, who they're associating with. Make sure that our young people are around good influences. Now, those are just some simple suggestions for parents. Now I want to turn it to the church for just a minute, and I want us to think about some things. First of all, there's some dangers associated with our young people. Most churches have youth ministers today, and that's a wonderful thing. But there's also a danger sometimes when you have one person doing most of the teaching or all the teaching with the young people. I know you appreciate Adam, and he does a great job. He's a wonderful young man. He's spiritually mature, and he does a great job with the young people. But we've got to be careful because there's the risk of parents turning over the spiritual training of their children to a youth minister and neglecting their God-given role in training their children. That happens sometimes. Instead of trying to teach them to grow spiritually as parents, we let the youth minister do it. And we expect them to do all the spiritual things while we take care of everything else. And there's a danger in that. We need to make sure as parents we do what we're supposed to do. There's a risk involved when a youth work revolves around one person. And I've thought this for several years because a lot of times youth work becomes person-centered instead of Christ-centered. And when that youth minister leaves, what you see is great distress in the youth group, and that's normal. But you don't want to see people falling away. The focus needs to be on Jesus and on God instead of the individual. Also, when this happens and the teen graduates, he or she finds himself in a world where there are no longer devos, there are no pizza parties, there are no mission trips, there's no youth rallies and things like that. And so when that young person realizes those things are gone, a lot of times they'll fall away from the Lord's church. And we don't want that to happen. And those are some dangers that are associated with our youth work. And we need to make sure that we let Adam know how much we appreciate him for the great job that he's doing and help him any way that we can. But I want to tell you this morning, the church needs to establish connections with teens. Not just the youth minister, not just the youth minister's wife, not just the couples who have children in the youth program, but the church needs to establish connections with teens. And this is what Brother Dan Jenkins says in his article, and it just jumped out at me. You know, parents need help to raise their children. It's hard to raise children. You can remember when you were raising children how hard it was, how difficult it was. But today with all the media and things that are busting their wave, you know, we've got to be able to help those parents raise those children. Think about those homes where there's only one parent that's a Christian. I've seen it many times over the years that I've been a Christian. Mothers bringing children to church and having 2 or 3 children with her, and the father not being a Christian, not being there, not being involved, and how difficult it is. Help that mother out. Help that father out. When I was growing up, my mother took us to church by herself. And there were people who helped and made a difference and tried to help us focus on what we were there to do. Sometimes the grandparents aren't able to be involved in the lives of their grandchildren. Substitute grandparents can help for those who have grandparents who have little contact with their children. As older members, you have an opportunity to make a difference with the young people. And I would encourage you to reach out to these young people and to make a connection with them and to help them remain faithful to God. One thing that I see a lot of times with our young people is youth ministers will be the only ones from church that will attend their sporting events, their school activities, or their award ceremonies, or band performances, etc. In fact, we kind of feel like we pay them to do that sometimes, don't we? That's a natural thing. I know at Henderson, that's what people think. They think we pay them to do that. We don't have to go and do it. But what a difference it'd make in the lives of a young person if they saw you attending their sporting events. If you were to show up at their school activities, if you were to show up at their award ceremonies or the band performances or their scouting trips and things, what an impact that would make on those young people. Now, some of you may be looking at these parents of small children and thinking, bless their hearts. and sometimes, I probably think that too. But what we need to be doing is looking for ways to help that mom and that dad to raise that child in the right way. Because we all can help make a difference in their lives. There's a study that was conducted that shows unless a teenager has 7 contacts outside the youth group, he will likely leave the church when he's older and no longer be a part of the group. 7 contacts outside the youth group. And I'm going to tell you, I've got time to make contacts with the young people in Henderson and encourage them. I got a son who's still in the youth group for 1 more year, but after that's over, I don't want to feel like I've graduated, my responsibility is done, that I've raised my children and hopefully they're faithful and I can just retire from raising children. Because I'm going to tell you, I think it takes a congregation to raise a child. And we all have opportunities to reach out and to make a difference with the young people at church here. When I think about this, I realize that children are a blessing from God. In fact, Psalms 127, verse 3, it says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Some versions say, behold, children are a blessing from the Lord. And we know that they are. We know that they enrich our life, they make our lives better, and we're thankful for them. What I want to encourage us to do, I want to encourage you to do, is to do your part to help the young people of this church be what God wants them to be. You can make a difference. You may not have a teenager, but I doubt Adam would turn you away from a youth devo if you wanted to go and participate. You got a young man playing football, a young lady playing basketball, high school, junior high. I don't think they would turn your money away if you went to watch them participate. But what would happen is that young person would realize that. They would know that you care about them and the church cares about them, and that would help them to develop their faith, to know that other people care for them. This morning, as we wrap this up, it's important that we teach and raise our children the right way. But one of the most important things we can do is make sure our life is right with God. And if you need to make changes this morning, it's not too late to do that. I remember, and I may have told you this story before, about my son Daniel when he was just in kindergarten. He came home from school one day, and he and Kim had gotten home from school before I did from work. And I got home, and he was awful quiet. Now, if you know my son, you know he's not a quiet child. He's just like his mother. He talks all the time. But that's not true. I talk a lot more than my wife. But he came into the room where I was, and I could tell his little face was drooping, and he'd been crying. And I thought, my, what's going on? I looked at him and said, Daniel, what's the matter with you? He said, Daddy, I need to tell you something. And I thought, okay, what's a 5-year-old going to tell me that would cause tears to come in his face? And I thought, boy, something's wrong. And he said, I got in trouble at school today. You see, our rule was you got in trouble at school, you got in more trouble when you got home. And it was always easy for that to happen because my wife was a kindergarten teacher and taught right across the hall from his classroom. My daughter, we didn't have to worry about that, but my son, we did. And, we had to keep an eye on him. But he came in there and he told me, he said, I got in trouble at school today. And I said, okay. I said, what did you do? And I thought maybe he got out on the playground, got in a fight or something. And he said, I was talking too much. And the teacher put me in timeout and took a slip or something like that. And I thought, well, you probably deserved it. And I looked at him, and then I saw little tears rolling down his face. And he looked at me and he said, Daddy? I said, yes, son. He says, do you still love me? And I said, yes, son, I do. I still love you. And I tell you that because I want to tell you, our God still loves us when we make mistakes too. He doesn't give up on us. He wants us to repent of those sins, return to Him, ask Him to forgive us, and He'll wash those sins away because we serve a great God, a God who loves us, a God who wants us to put Him first in everything that we do. And this morning, if your life is not right with God, God would want you to come home, to get your life right with Him. It may be that you need to ask the church to pray for you, to have those sins washed away. Know that we'd be glad to do that. It could be this morning that you're here and you've not given your life to God yet. You've not surrendered your will in obedience, been baptized for remission of your sins. We'd be glad to help you do that this morning if that's your desire. You see, God does not give up on us. Let's not give up on Him. This morning, if you're subject to the invitation, would you come as we stand and as we sing?
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you